Welcome to the Talking Free podcast. As the girl who has always been told she talks too much, can speak with a mouthful of marbles underwater, and can sell ice to Eskimos, I have found the perfect platform to have my say, freely. I am here to share with real people, having raw conversations about authentic stories. It is a place where you can feel safe discussing anything and everything. These stories will make you laugh, cry, debate, wonder, intrigue, and get curious about life as you talk free with Trudy Marie. Please note that the following podcast may contain discussions or topics that could be triggering or distressing for some listeners. I aim to provide informative and supportive content, but understand that certain themes may evoke strong emotions or memories. If you find yourself feeling overwhelmed or in need of support while listening, I encourage you to pause the podcast and take a break. Remember that it is okay to prioritise your well-being and seek assistance from trained professionals. There is no shame in this. In fact, it is the first brave step to healing. If you require immediate support, please consider reaching out to Lifeline on 13 11 14 or a crisis intervention service in your area. Thank you for listening, and please take care of yourself as you engage with the content of this podcast. Hello and welcome to another Talking Free podcast episode. Today is another solo one with yours truly, and I'm going to start off by premising that this episode may be a little triggering for some because I'm going to be talking about religion. Now, I am completely aware, as my grandfather always used to say, you should never argue over politics and religion. Now, why I don't want to argue about it, I just want to bring a story to life about who I was and how I was raised comparative to my current belief systems. Now, I see religion as a deeply personal and very transformative journey. My opinions here aren't meant to segregate, they're not meant to judge, but rather just seek an understanding to how we find our own path. Now, my experience in religion has offered a framework for exploring some of life's biggest questions, a sense of community, a sense of belonging, but it's one that has evolved over time. Now, each person's spiritual journey is unique, but it's crucial to discern your own life and your own beliefs rather than simply adopting the beliefs of our families and our communities, even our cultures. When we embrace this individuality, we can grow authentically. We can find a deeper connection to our own values, our own beliefs, our own truths. Now, on my father's side of the family, we come from a very strong Irish Catholic background. My mum, on the other hand, she was raised in an English Anglican family. Now, when I consider these two religions, I actually have to have a laugh because the Church of England, if you may or may not know, was actually created by a king, Henry VIII, and it was created because he couldn't get his own way. So instead of the Catholic Church allowing him to divorce Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn, he created his own church so he could, hence the birth of an Anglican religion. Now, from the Catholic Church point of view, it is one of the, if not the largest Christian church with, I think it's over like 1.3 billion people baptized worldwide. It's also the second last religious body behind Muslim. It is one of the oldest and largest international institutions, and it has a very predominant part or role in the development of Western civilization. Like if you research history, Christianity and especially Catholicism is right there amongst it. And the core beliefs are all based on the Nicene Creed. In recent years, I grew up learning the Apostles' Creed. If you don't know Catholicism as a religion, there are 7 main sacramental rites. And most people only receive 6 because the 7th one is if you enter the vocation of religion by becoming a priest or a nun, then you receive holy orders. But for most people, we start at birth, and I was baptized in the Roman Catholic Church when I was born, or just after I was born, and I have godparents who they're supposed to be the people that if anything should happen to you, that they will be the person who continues your faith and continues to develop your faith within the Catholic Church. My godparents have never been like that for me in my life. They've been an uncle and auntie surrogate and have always been there, but they've never actually contributed fully to that particular role. Now, as a child, you do your first reconciliation, which is like penance and forgiveness of sins and looking at that sort of thing, before you take the sacrament of Holy Communion, which in the Catholic Church is represented as the body and blood of Christ. So I think I was about 8, and you kind of do your first reconciliation a few weeks before you do your first Holy Communion. You are dressed in this bridal looking outfit. I had this lace dress and a lace veil, which I'm sure was just a piece of a curtain back in the day, white tights, white shoes, and you're meant to be this kind of little virginal being going to church. I look back and think how important that sacrament was, but God, I don't even relate to that Trudy from that long ago. Now, we had a delay in me making my confirmation, so I wasn't 15 until I made my confirmation, purely because the small community we lived in, the Archbishop who performed the confirmations only used to come up to the community every couple of years. And I think the time before it that I could have made it, I wasn't in town, we were away. And so I made it the next time. And there was quite a large group of it. I actually made it with my sister because she was of age at the same time. So hence I was confirmed a Catholic, and that's the confirmation of your faith, supposedly as an adult, that you were making on your own outside your parents. But for me, this was never part of, like at 15, you don't even know yourself. Like you haven't even worked out who you're going to be when you leave school and things like that. So how can you confirm your faith when you don't really even know what's out there? You are still confirming the faith of your family and your community, not that of yourself. And I didn't fully understand this until it was done with my children, and I'll get to that. Obviously, I got married and took on the vocation of marriage. However, because my ex-husband was a divorcee at the time, we weren't able to marry inside the Catholic Church because it was frowned upon. But our marriage vows were blessed by my then husband's uncle, who happened to be a priest. So he also came from a very religious Roman Catholic family. The last sacrament that I will talk about is the one anointing of the sick, and that is something I hope I never have to lead unless I'm on my deathbed, and I hope that's for a long time coming. And it's something you hear about, especially with the elderly, or if somebody has a terminal disease. So obviously I went through that whole process. I was raised Catholic. We used to go to church every Sunday. We would be involved in other community events within the Catholic Church. A lot of our family and friends within the community. I grew up in a very small town of like 5,000 people, so we knew a lot of people through the church. It was part of your community. And then when we moved to Perth, we became part of another parish not far from our home. And within that parish, I then became involved in like youth work. So I started off as a 16 to kind of 18-year-old involved in, it was called Antioch at the time, which is a youth ministry within a local parish, usually of high school to young adults, and it's a very spiritual program. And so I used to go to church on a Sunday, I used to go to Antioch on a Sunday night, and then I used to meet up with Antioch people on a Wednesday and go to church on a Wednesday morning. Yes, that's how heavily involved I was with the Catholic Church. During that time and growing up, from the time I was 8, I also became an altar server, which meant you helped the priest do the Mass. I used to be a commentator, as in run the Mass. I used to do readings. And then I also became a special minister, which is where you can actually give communion and assist the priest in giving communion to the parishioners. So I just look at that particular time and honestly, I knew no different. That was my upbringing. That was who I was. And I think even at one stage, I considered becoming a nun. I kid you not. And I just I have to laugh at that now because I'm like, mate, my life could have been so different. But anyway, we used to go on camps and retreats from the parish. We also used to join a larger community of events. And I remember going to a Catholic religious camp when I was about 18, 19. It was for a week. We stayed at Aquinas College. There was a whole group of us in the boarding houses, and it was a phenomenal event from the memories that I have. It was very spiritual, very nurturing, very caring, but a heap of fun at the same time. From there, I moved on to youth ministry, which is kind of a step up, and it's more young adult. You kind of have to be 18. So you're out of that Antioch phase into still being devout. And I would go to, instead of going to Antioch on a Sunday night, I would go to youth ministry. That's kind of how the role took on from there. I then met my ex-husband, father of my children. Now, he was a divorcee with a son, and that's probably the first time that I ever really questioned the religion and my faith and my beliefs, because I was almost shunned, an outcast, everything from the Catholic community, from my youth ministry, all because I fell in love with somebody who was a divorcee, which is just totally taboo in the Catholic Church. Even to this day, if you were to get married in a Catholic Church, neither party can be married prior. You would have had to have your first marriage annulled. So that had me questioning who I was, but I still continued then. As I said, I had my vows blessed by my husband's uncle. We went on to have our 2 children, and because it was expected, I had both my children baptized in the Catholic Church. I still had quite strong beliefs, even though I had been shunned from the church. So both my children were baptized. Both my children had godparents. But one set of godparents, which is my daughter's godparents, she is extremely religious. In fact, her son is a priest. So she took on that role as, quite serious and has always been there for my daughter. My sons, on the other hand, were Catholic as well. However, they have never really been in that space, kind of like my own godparents. So that's what happened in 2001, 2002. In 2003, with the release of Dan Brown's fictional book, The Da Vinci Code, I began to question more, because while this was written as a work of fiction, there was a lot of reference to a lot of factual information. And I went down that rabbit hole of researching, because I was like, this has me questioning my entire upbringing. So that just was a whole change. Then I split with my ex-husband, which devastated me because I'd now become that divorcee statistic. So that was a horrendous time period, because again, it had me questioning my own values, my own beliefs, my own place within the church. But I still sent my kids to a Catholic school. So they had pretty much their whole primary school years, from about kindergarten through to year 5. They attended a Catholic school. They had liturgies. They had Catholic teachings within the school. And while I don't regret that, purely for the fact that they were brought up with quite good value and belief systems, because you're taught to be a good Christian, it didn't really make any difference academically. So there was that nurturing and that type of thing within the church, but yeah, it didn't change it academically. But when it came to making their reconciliation, Holy Communion and confirmation, we were actually in Queensland, and they do things differently there. You actually make your first reconciliation, you then make your confirmation, and then you receive Holy Communion. So they look at it as that you need to confirm your faith before you can receive the sacrament of Holy Communion, being the body and blood of Christ. And that had me question things again, because I'm like, if this is the one church and this is the one rules and regulations, why are things different in a different state? Why do we do things in a different order? And it also had me question, which I mentioned previously, about that whole act of confirmation, because I was asking my children, who were like 8 or 9 at the time, to say, this is the faith we choose. This is what we confirm. We confirm our baptism. And I'm like, they're barely children. How are they supposed to know what they want to believe in? So it had me question everything again. And probably the final straw for me in my experience was when we moved back to WA in 2010. I had to consider which school I sent my children to. The Catholic system would not take a bar of me or my children because we couldn't afford it financially. So there was no pastoral care, as in like, you're a single mum, we get your circumstances, we will provide a scholarship or whatever because you're involved in a parish. It was just like, no, you can't pay it, so catch you later. That really went against everything I had been raised to believe within the Catholic Church with regards to pastoral care. So I was like, no, my kids are now going to a government school and that's okay. So that's kind of my journey within the church. And I look at both my kids now. Both my kids don't attend church. I could not tell you the last time they attended church. They grew up, went through their high school years in a government school. And I think unless it has been a family occasion, whether it has been a wedding, a funeral, or a baptism, confirmation, Holy Communion of one of their close relatives, none of them have stepped foot in a church. And that's okay because they are now adults and they get to live their own life how they see fit. When I start to question things within my own beliefs, and this is where I say that you have to have discernment and you have to understand what your own beliefs are and your own truths are and your own values that aren't related to your family or your religion or your community or your culturally. You have to do it for yourself. So one of the things I started to question was the Bible itself. Now, there are 66 books that make up the canon of the religious Bible. It's divided into obviously the Old and New Testament, but the Bible as it stands wasn't universally accepted until 367 AD by Anthasius, which was, I think that's how you pronounce it, the Bishop of Alexandria. And it wasn't formed at once. It was formed over time as this universally accepted. But I look at that with the dates and go, we talk about BC being before Christ and then AD, everything after. But it took 367 years to work out what the teachings were. So what happened in that time and what happened to all the other stories? Who decided that this was going to be the universally accepted book? Then I look at the next stage, which is where I think it was about even 170 AD. I don't know that date for sure, but there were 4 authentic gospels declared. Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's what I grew up with. It's still in the Bible that I was given on my confirmation. That's what I have. But when you look at it from a bigger picture point of view, the 4 Gospels represent the 4 corners of the universe and the 4 elements of earth, air, fire, and water. So that goes into more pagan traditions and more spiritual Mother Nature universal traditions that are not necessarily linked to one religion. So my question is, what happened to all the other books? And who chose the 4 and said that that's it? That's marked as gospel. That's another thing that I was questioning. The next thing I look at, especially in modern day times and, some of the things that have surfaced over the last few years, is actually the sacrament of communion. We talk about vampires as being wrong and it's fallacy, it's fictional. We talk about cannibalism, and that's such a taboo topic and people are revolted by that. Yet here we are, as young children, 8 to 10 years of age, learning in the church to have this sacrament of Holy Communion, which is the body and blood of Christ. We drink red wine as a representative of blood, and we eat unleavened bread as representation of body. Why? When I kind of first had that realization, I've never had communion from this day. I was just like, what the fuck am I actually doing here? It was just so surreal and something I could not get my head around. Regardless of what your thoughts and beliefs are, it was just this is totally weird. So that's my opinion on that particular thing. The other thing that gets me with the Catholic Church is, again, that whole sacrament of reconciliation, that especially your first, because your first reconciliation is this view that we were all born as sinners and we need to repent for basically being human and for the sins of our parents and for not being perfect. But please tell me somebody who is perfect in this world. And why the fuck are we repenting for the wrongdoings of our parents? Like, that's not up to a child to do, in my opinion anyway. The other one is the cross or the crucifix. And for many, many years, I wore a crucifix around my neck and I had a crucifix hanging up in my home. The whole time I was married to my first husband, we had a crucifix hanging in our home. What I don't understand now is that why in the Catholic Church do we view this symbol of torture and death? Because people who were hanged on a cross back in the day, like it is a severe form of torture. Yet we view the crucifix and look to this symbol as one of hope and forgiveness. Like, can anybody else not see the contradiction in that? I've never hung a crucifix again in my house, and I've never worn one around my neck since. Then I look at a simple gesture that you're taught from a very early age in the church is making the sign of the cross. And back in the day, and for some sacraments, it is still just a cross on the forehead, which is over your third eye. However, when you're taught to make the sign of the cross, it is literally head, heart, shoulder to shoulder. And if you look at things like spiritually and in line with chakras, there is that connection from head to heart. But then you put a line through it. You literally disconnect the connection you've just made. And so that's something I never got either. Again, it links back to this whole cross and crucifixion symbology. But from a personal point of view and a personal energetics point of view, you literally touch your head to your heart, which is creating a connection, only to then put a line through it and disconnect it. It makes absolutely no sense to me. The other thing I would like to talk about with regards to my opinion on what I question within the religious faith of Catholicism is the two main holidays, traditions, festive days of the calendar being Christmas and Easter. And both of these refer to pagan traditions. And obviously growing up and to this day, everybody celebrates Christmas as the birth of Christ. The birth of Christ has never actually been recorded. It's not in the Bible. It's not anywhere. But the date of Christmas actually goes back to a Roman calendar with the winter solstice, and it's associated with the sun. Now, in the southern hemisphere, it's actually summer solstice. The 22nd is the day we celebrate it. It could be anywhere in the old calendar up to the 25th. So we are literally praising the sun. Hottest day of the year, or the longest day of the year. It's all about the sun and sun worship. And if you go back to ancient Egypt times, it's all about sun worship. So yes, we're told that it's the birth of Jesus and we celebrate it in that way, but I just go, yeah, something's a bit off here. It didn't ever quite equate. And the same with Easter. Easter is supposed to be the death and resurrection of Christ. And it's, supposed to be this time of new beginnings and that sort of thing. But in human form, we celebrate people's dates of death, whatever the case may be, on the same date every year. That's the day you're born and the day you die, the two dates on your headstone. But for some reason in the Catholic Church, the date of Easter always changes, and it changes based on full moons, which again is a pagan tradition. And if you look at in the Northern Hemisphere, it's based around the spring equinox, a time of new beginning. So I just, again, look at that whole thing and go, why are we supposedly celebrating this death and resurrection of somebody, but it's based on a whole different ideology? So it's just never makes sense. And then I look at it as a whole and go, why are there so many different religions? If there is one God, one source, one whatever, why are there so many different religions with so many different rules and so many different beliefs and so many different customs? Now, I get that there is some cultural and historical context, that things have changed, like when there wasn't the mass communication around the world and that people had their own interpretations over time. I know that there has been an evolution of beliefs and how that has changed over time, social needs, even philosophical differences. But for me today, when you see these gospel evangelical style churches that just pop up in your local suburb with a local, in a local business warehouse or a business building, commercial building, whatever you like to call it, is this so-called church that people go to. So what even is the definition of a church anymore? I mean, sometimes I think it's all about evading tax because, let's be real, you have a church and you don't have to pay tax. Which brings me to another little thing that I've just thought of then is the Catholic Church has two collections. One supposedly for the church and one supposedly for the priest. I kind of get the collection for the priest because they don't get paid. As far as I know, they don't get paid by the Catholic Church. They live off whatever their collections are within the parish. So I kind of get that one. But the other one, I was like, as a parishioner, I cannot remember ever receiving or having those funds used for good or like within the parish. So where does all that money go? Just another thing to have a think about. I've probably gone off on a huge tangent here, and I could say so much about this without actually going down into the rabbit holes of, a deep dive into the Catholic Church. But this is just my interpretation, my point of view from going from being heavily raised in the Catholic Church, church every Sunday, strict upbringing, youth ministry, thought I could be a nun at one stage, through to how I feel right now and everything that I've questioned over the last probably 10 to 20 years. I personally do not go to church anymore. And I don't think I would ever step into a church for a mass unless it was for a funeral, for a wedding. All my nieces have been baptized, christened by now, so there's not even a reason to do that anymore. And I don't know if my kids, when they have kids, would they ever baptize their children into the Catholic Church? Do I believe there is something greater than all of us out there? I do. Do I believe that somebody's going to come and save us? No, I don't. There is no one person that is going to come back and miraculously change my life or whatever the case may be. I think that the Bible is a book of fables. It's not based on fact. There might be a little bit of fact in there, but I think it's a bunch of stories meant to teach us how to be good human beings in a lot of ways, most of which you could actually go back to just the 10 Commandments of Moses. Like, you look at those 10 Commandments, and if we all lived like that and practice our lives like that, there would be no reason for lawlessness. There would be no reason for police to do their job, because if we just lived under the basic guise of the 10 Commandments, then wouldn't the world be a better place? But I believe that our power comes from within, and that if we don't trust ourselves, whether it's having this conversation about religion and looking at your own values and beliefs. But I think the minute we hand over to an external source and validate our lives to an external source, then we have lost all our own power. We have lost all whatever it is to be human. That the greatest gift we have on this planet in our human form is to live a life. And I don't think it necessarily has to be within the realms of some particular religious upbringing. Thank you for tuning in to the Talking Free podcast today. If you have an idea for a future episode or a story you'd like to share, then please message me, as I am always up for real, raw, and authentic conversations. If you love what you are hearing, then please be sure to subscribe to hear all the latest episodes, and spread the word to your family, friends and colleagues so they too can listen in. If you are sharing on social media, then please be sure to tag me at _Trudy_Marie_ so I can personally acknowledge you. I am always open to comment about how these episodes have resonated with you. It would also mean the world to me if you were to leave a 5-star review to ensure the Talking Free podcast is heard by more listeners around the world. And remember, lead with love as you live this one wild and precious life.